Outside the publishing, more prominent pioneers of AI have sounded alarms about the potential risks to human civilization. We're all on the eve of destruction once again, as Barry Maguire sang in the 1960s. Look that one up. However, big tech owners reassure customers that the upside of AI is a better life for all. As the slide from Baidu tells you, this is their view of a digital civilization. Just download the latest app and pray your data isn't all over the dark web. Ray Kurzweil, a Silicon-based entrepreneur, says that we will soon be able to connect our biological neocortex to a synthetic neocortex in the cloud via nanorobots, similar to how a smartphone interacts with the cloud. This sounds great, I can hardly wait. But what is the value of techno-optimism if the world implodes with alternative facts and simulations of reality? In a new book called Data Grab, media scholars Mageas and Coldry consider two ways of viewing civilization. First, the civilized subjects within the boundaries of the nation state, and second, the expansion of national platforms into new territories. Of course, TikTok may be subliminally re-civilizing us while grabbing data. Civilization is a key word in Chinese political discourse. It is attached to a range of political reforms: material, spiritual, ecological, political, and now digital civilizations. All these variants intermesh seamlessly with the underlying structure of Chinese political culture and reinforce the claim that China is a civilization state. The idea of civilization has far less traction in modern multicultural nation states, although the US has its exceptionalism. In Australia, we don't seem to care. We're all boat people anyway. Both Russia and China self-identify as civilization states. In Russia, the concept was unveiled by Vladimir Putin in 2013. In China, its usage found popularity following the publication of Martin Jacques' 2010 book, When China Rules the World. As is often the case, ideas promoted by Western scholars find their way into Chinese think tanks and from there into state policy. My sense is that the conflation of media and civilization will lead to more outputs. Perhaps Chinese civilizational discourse will take off in the global south. This is certainly the hope from Beijing. Tell China's stories well, so it goes. Wang has written about the changing meaning of civilization in China, from a shared possession, Tianxiaoweigong, to a mission to civilize the world. Gregory Lee notes how the institutionalization of a simplified written language in the Maoist period contributed to the construction of a national political imaginary, although not to popular culture. How then should we make sense of digital civilization, a term that has recently entered the Chinese political lexicon? Does it refer to Tianxiaoweigong, something that is shared or something that can be used to civilize others? Or is it more about celebrating domestic capacity, for instance, the so-called Innovative Nation project that was proposed in 2006 by Hu Jintao? Is it a slogan that can be used to justify the management of dissent? It's probably all of these things and more. If we read the speeches and policy documents, although I would suggest that digital civilization in China is primarily designed for domestic purposes, much the same way that spiritual civilization was used in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Spiritual civilization was invoked as a moral corrective to resist unhealthy influence from outside. A campaign to civilize Chinese cyberspace was subsequently initiated in 2000. The so-called Network Civilization Project was jointly launched by 8 key ministries and government agencies. By the time Internet Plus and other digital technology programs kicked in 2015, the Chinese internet was seen on an industrial scale. It was in the remit of emerging technologies, and this would soon include AI. On September 27, 2021, the English language China Daily announced Wuzhen Summit to promote digital civilization. The World Internet Conference was held in the city of Wuzhen in Zhejiang province, home of the Chinese tech giant Alibaba. A letter from Xi Jinping congratulated delegates. Xi said, "It is imperative for the international community to join hands and seize opportunities and meet challenges by following the trend of informatization and digitization, as well as networking and smart development." The trend was inevitable. With most of the world's borders closed to commercial travel due to the COVID-19 pandemic, face-to-face communication had given way to endless Zoom calls. Shares in tech companies skyrocketed. In June 2023, the theme of digital civilization was once again foremost. The city was Qufu, the city in northern Shandong province. Qufu is regarded as the home of the celebrated, revered Chinese sage Confucius. Press reports celebrated the decision to locate the 2023 World Internet Conference at a site of great significance to Chinese civilization. The event highlighted the government's aspiration to build a community of shared future in cyberspace, with a particular focus on the challenges presented by artificial intelligence. But the term digital China had been lingering in the air, so to speak. In 2017, McKinsey published a report entitled Digital China, Powering the Digital Economy to Global Competitiveness. McKinsey cited the massive growth in mobile payments in China, 11 times the scale of the US in 2016, as evidence of a digital China. The term later acquired a wider provenance. In 2019, Wang wrote about the other digital China, the world of non-confrontational online activism in China. Wang viewed digital China in a more positive light, identifying the themes of philanthropy and tech for good. Others have used the term digital China to cover a range of research covering scholarship on platforms, digital labour and transnational actors. Yuan Wei referred to digital China in the context of a transition in the global order, whereby a rising China is challenging the globalism of the West. Predictably, digital China has been described as a fourth industrial revolution with Chinese characteristics. Digital China and digital civilization are examples of what I call a techno-cultural imaginary. There are many kinds of imaginaries that can be evoked, although Charles Taylor's conceptualization of social imaginary is best known. Scholars in STS favour the socio-technological imaginary, which seems to connote something that is tangible, in contrast to something that just imaginary or socially constructed. The techno-cultural imaginary brings together two ideas that resonate with Chinese history, technology and culture. Obviously, there's a lot more I can say about both of these if there's time, but it's important to say that these ideas are the residue of history. In other words, part of the China story, which must be told well. With regard to technology, there are the four great inventions, celebrated in print as the genius of China. And there is the humiliation of the Opium Wars, when China's technology was unable to compete with that of the West. During the May 4th period, when China was most open to the West, ideas such as evolution and romanticism washed over the old feudal tradition. Underpinning the uncertainty of progress in the 20th century was a kind of scientific futurism, which was finally allowed to express itself in the 1980s. This was a period of openness when non-Marxist thinkers such as Alvin Toffler and John Naisbitt became honoured guests of Premier Zhao Ziyang. Julian Gurwitz says that the current focus on innovation-driven development and the attention invested in the digital economy, AI, nanotechnology and quantum computing has its legacy in that decade. So his book is very well worth reading for a bit of background there. So in saying that the techno-cultural imaginary is socially constructed, I'm considering several intersecting ideas. From a technical perspective, a sense of techno-utopianism prevails, a world in which connectivity is the norm and people anticipate the latest labour-saving device. I would argue that it's a narrative of modernisation. The CCTV News presents a cavalcade of futuristic smart robots, where in the past it was toiling peasants. This is digital civilization. And like spiritual civilization, it must be constructed, 建设, must 建设 digital civilization. Same as spiritual civilization, is 建设, constructed. From a cultural perspective, the emergence of the term cultural confidence in policy speak implies that Chinese civilizational values are experiencing a revival, i.e. being reconstructed, while Western competitive values are deconstructed and contributing to a new clash of civilizations. This is, of course, the political spin from the Politburo's PRT, and they probably have a point. The reality on the ground is more complicated. The techno-cultural imaginary can be framed by another concept derived from political science. Writing about conflicts that have taken place in Russia and Ukraine, the political scientist Timothy Snyder uses a concept he calls the politics of eternity. Snyder says that past cataclysms and conflicts foster a sense of grievance, something that must be attended to. The past must be restored. This unfinished business is writ large in the public imagination. Civilization thus becomes a barometer of identity. 1 minute. The politics of eternity and recall the past requires the great rejuvenization of the Chinese nation. In China, the training of engineers of the soul proceeds in specialist academies like the National Academy of the Arts. The journalism institutes, meanwhile, new technologies challenge existing pedagogy. In 2019, the director of the Ministry of Education, Yang, said, "Learning new technologies to tell Chinese stories well in a globally accepted way is necessary to enhance China's voice." What does it mean to tell China's stories well in a globally accepted way? In January 2024, the party journal Study Times announced the application of ChatGPT has changed the production process and model of international news content, improved the efficiency in international news dissemination, and brought revolutionary impact to international communication. Some have labelled this the ChatGPT moment, just as effort to promote China's righteous version of history and civilization are described as Civilization, the global civilization initiative. The Chinese road to modernisation becomes an information superhighway.
Sorry, please, last few sentences.
One sentence. Factories are upskilled as data geeks, while the data of people belongs to the state, or washed over by machines of loving grace. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then next in line, I believe we have digitally Zixue type. Let me see if I can close this properly.
Okay, yeah. So, apologize. Originally planned to attend, but since I'm going to another conference in Brisbane in 10 days, it doesn't make sense to go there twice in such a short time, so I decided to attend this online. But well, our presentation is based on a book chapter we contributed. Co-author Professor Long from Communication University of China and I, we did a chapter for a book that was to be released any time. So we talked about surveillance in China, of course, in that slot frame. Apparently, it's a hot topic. It's a lot of discussion going on there now. We understand quite well now. We are living in a society where surveillance is a way of life. There's no escape. Now, this is true in almost every society in the world, but China is a very interesting case to look at. A lot of things to examine, of course, because the particular political, social environments, and there's a lot of other issues there. So this is an interesting case to study. So we look at each chapter. We looked at a number of technological implementations in China. And we discussed those technologies in the context of social surveillance. And one of the projects we talked about is the smart cities. So the smart cities was started about 10 years ago with the national government. So there have been two stages. You know, the first white paper was released about 10 years ago, and there's a recent update. So the idea of the smart city is to build the infrastructure across major cities for four purposes. At least there are so the three major goals: smart power grid, smart transportation, and smart security. At this point, about 800 cities in China have joined this initiative. They've become part of the infrastructure, and the main thing of interest here is the smart security, mainly for social security within cities. Now, of course, national surveillance projects, and there are many of those. The prominent cases, the Great Firewall, of course, is pretty well known, it's notorious. About 15 years ago, they started the China Crime Information Center. So they encourage citizens to report crimes or any suspicious activities online. There's another called Ministry of State Security. Anyone can report. Of course, there's real-time social media surveillance. So the big projects. So one is the National Surveillance Network projects there, safe cities. So what is safe cities? The idea is to interconnect all the surveillance systems within the cities to create the environment where rapid responses can be initiated in cases of disasters, in cases of emergencies, and so on. the next project, Skynet. China has installed the biggest number of CCTV cameras in the world now. So there's a camera at every street corner, everything's captured. Skynet is the idea that all the cameras will be interconnected. And those images will be sent to a processing center in each city. We have the real-time reading of the data. The other project called Sharp Eyes. This was the latest, started the latest compared with the other two, but this one, the unique part of this one is the Sharp Eyes project is covering the countryside. The surveillance project started in big cities, and then now it's diffused to the rural areas. Because the rural areas, they cover a wide stretch of land, so it's impossible to install cameras everywhere. So the idea is to install cameras in the key areas, in the rural countryside places. And those cameras are interconnected again, and residents in those rural areas can use their smartphones, they can connect to the cameras, they can process images. But more importantly, they can report. So this is connected to cable TV networks. So when people are watching cable TV at home, they can press the button, they can report to the center if there's anything suspicious. Facial recognition. Now, probably China is implementing the most sophisticated facial recognition technology now across the cities. They're using that for a lot of purposes, to make payment, to do a lot of other things there. Now, give some examples here. The first one, John Sudworth, he was stationed in China to cover China for the BBC for years. He left a couple of years ago. But in 2017, he requested access to the CCTV cameras in China. He was granted access. He wanted to do an experiment, but he did this in Guiyang, the provincial city of Guizhou, which is a quite remote area. So he was testing the capability of the surveillance system. So he was trying to stay as long as he could, not to be captured. So how long? He was caught 7 minutes. So he was not able to go beyond 7 minutes before he was caught. Now, the next one, it was widely covered in China in recent years. Criminals were caught when they went to concerts. How they were captured, because they're real-time cameras there, through the concerts. So facial images are captured, and then this images were processed, and then those people were caught through this process. So far, more than 80 of those criminals, those wanted people, have been captured. The picture on the right side is the guy who was wearing a helmet. So I was seeing real estate apartments in Beijing, but the real estate companies, what they did was they used facial recognition. They're trying to urge people to buy on their first visit. So people who wanted to buy on their first visit, they would get like a 100,000 yuan discount. And if you go there the second time, because the official images were already captured, they would recognize you. So this guy didn't want to be captured. So he wore a helmet because he wanted to see. That more than one time. So the second image on the right was more recent. It was last year. It took place in Henan province. And so people invest in local banks. In a few of them, this has happened quite a few times. So the investors were not able to get their money back. So they were protesting. So what the Henan police were doing was they captured those people. Once, because most of those investors were from outside the province. So how would the police do that? Because they would capture the images because they had the database of the investors in the bank. So those people were in the system. So they were able to compare those faces with their database. So the people who were traveling to Henan, to Zhengzhou at that time, the police would know in advance before they even arrived. So while those people arrived in the city, they were captured, they were sent back. Those are sort of the cases where those facial recognition technology systems could be used there now. And so talk about the numerous examples. So there are a lot more of those examples, of course. But what we want to say in the context of the theorizing part, it's a lot, because there's a lot to decipher, to talk about the theoretical aspect of that. So and I use a famous quote from Eric Schmidt, who was the CEO of Google for years. He said, "Where there's connectivity, there's surveillance." Of course, we want to add today, where there's human, there's connectivity. It's very hard to get away from technology, from the network anywhere now. So what it means is the surveillance is everywhere, and there's this way that's happened. So we have learned quite a bit over the past few years from Edward Snowden, WikiLeaks, and Facebook, and all those. So it's happening everywhere, right? So now there's been discussion of the maximum surveillance society for a while, and the first time it was discussed 20 years ago. Now, this is happening at a very different scale. It's happening in a very different context. The capability of this surveillance society is unparalleled. So there's nothing that happened in the past at this level. So it has a lot of implications, of course, within the context of China. When you have a one-party state, when the state has access to all those resources, there's really hard to predict a limit to what the state can do in using the surveillance technologies, to use the surveillance capabilities to do things state wants. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and that could not have been more brilliantly timed. I'm not sure if you even saw my warnings, but that was brilliant. And thank you so much for this great overview and for joining us from probably such a different time zone. Next on the list, we have Wilfred Wang.
Okay, thanks very much. My name is Wilfred, lecturer in Media and Communication Study at the University of Melbourne, and also alumni, former PhD student here at QUT. So it's always great to come back here whenever I have the opportunity. And so in this talk today, I would like to share some thoughts and reflection made from several projects that I have engaged in, and also some experience through my personal encounter during my 2 separate trips to China over the past few years. And specifically, I like to engage the theory of media operationalism to make sense of some of the techno-social entanglement in China that I have observed. My intention today is not to offer any, conclusive remarks or, the so-called argument, but to make some perspective and also invite all of you to sort of bring your perspective onto a trend that I believe have long been documented, but I feel less so theorized, at least not in the field of Chinese internet research. So let me start with a personal experience just a couple of weeks ago that it was my first time pre-ordering a cup of coffee while Weixin, the domestic version of WeChat. And many people today, they kind of no longer offer their coffee over the counter in the store these days, but they like to do so in advance over some sort of online platform because that's a lot more time efficient. So I had my goal several weeks ago when I was in China, and I tried to do that. So by linking in my Weixin account with the Coffee Chain's mini program, I created a new account with the Coffee Chain, which allow me to place an order, and then as usual, I receive that order number and the notification in both the mini program and also about SMS text message when the coffee was ready to pick up. So when I went to the cafe, however, that's when things got a little bit interesting. The staff asked me to scan the collection code that's generated on my mini program. It was my first time ordering a coffee on Weixin, so I actually literally had no idea what he was talking about. And so the staff literally had to walk me through the platform. So thinking about platform walkthrough as a method, he literally walked me through the platform, helped me to find my code and scan it, complete the transaction. I got my coffee, so that's the most important thing. So what was striking to me was how the staff throughout the entire process never really cared about who I was and whether I was the real person as registered and whether I actually had other evidence such as the text message or any notification from the Weixin mini program. Instead, all he cared about and insisted on was having that, what they call the collection code, and then because that code they must be scanned in order to complete the transaction at their end, so the system over that side knows that wow, the whole thing has been recognized. So in other words, who I was as a person, my possession of all the other evidence become rather irrelevant. The computer system only recognized that one code generated by their own mini program to process the transaction. I, the person, was very much irrelevant. Further, I actually don't know why the system knew I was a male. I never input my gender, but somehow for those who can read Chinese, as you can see there, my account suggesting that I am indeed a male over here. So my experience of copy order reminded me about the transformating practices of biopolitical governance and control with automated decision making media in China over the years and indeed across the world to a great extent. As critical scholars such as Rev. Roy and Burns have argued, algorithms do not target individual but relations, the relation between individual and their digitally prescribed identity, i.e. subjects. Through reflecting on some of the previous work I have conducted with my colleagues such as Sun Yu, who also appeared in this photo. Kindly thanks for sharing this photo with me, and also Peng Fei Fu over here, that several subject projects together. So through that reflection, it was quite remarkable to see that how one's identity and status are increasingly being determined by the so-called data by self, which are generated for the person instead of generated by the person, and that is irrespective to how the person actually felt. So during China's pandemic control, for example, the health status of one's digital identity of the health tracking code, 健康码, which was generated for and prescribed to the person by the computational process, had real impact on the person socially, physically, and emotionally. The color of our code would have a significant and in fact immediate impact on the person, whether they are free to go, stay at home, or endure the prolonged quarantine. So in China today, and indeed around the world, we are living in a platform economy that require and even force us to create new and endless digital identity for different transactions and tasks and purposes. During my recent trips to China, literally just a couple of weeks ago, creating a new digital me was literally the default expectation to live, to travel, and even to work and study. So for example, tourists today are now encouraged to, and in some cases, such as the Forbidden City in Beijing, we must pre-book our ticket with our ID documentation. So local will use their 身份证, the ID card, or as someone like myself with foreign passport, then it's my Australian passport. However, one's ID is not a universal pass to all these attractions, but a gadget to unlock their eligibility to book and enter, so to hold a ticket, so to speak, and then carry such information until the transaction has been completed. While much has been said about how datafication in China have been centralized and how personal identification are increasingly linked with this broader digital ecosystem in China, the lived experience, at least in China, I would say, is more about self-fragmentation and endless self-fragmentation. We are always required to create new digital self for different tasks and transactions. This is merely a list that I could remember. I have created the different self. I'm sure I forgot something and left some out during my 4 weeks trip in China back in May. So I guess the same logic applies to domestic travel and university campus visit in China as well. By scanning our ID documents, we are not scanning the real self to to a certain extent, the officially recognized identity, but instead what we are scanning is a self that is subject to the rules and requirement of the economic production and political monitoring that such an identity has been associated with. Such a transactional orientated self will soon expire and then replaced by another new digital identity for future transaction. One's identity, card, and passport are not just there to verify whether the person is real or, I guess, authentic, but to verify the person's entitlement to the specific transaction that they are either purchased or they are required to complete, just like my experience with the coffee order. So I guess the same logic therefore applies to one's biometric, which no longer just reinforce or refer to one's biophysical qualities, but their transactional capacity or duty for the particular economic or political task. I'm not sure if this can be played, but basically I just recorded myself while I was in the domestic airport in China. So by scanning my face, my boarding information immediately appear without any further evidence there. But there is, in a great sense, I will argue that it wasn't really knowing that was me as Wilfred Wang, as a person, but as, I guess, a passenger, a customer who soon board this particular flight from this particular location, and so to speak. Because if I go back there next day, I don't think they will ever remember me or recognize who the hell this guy was. So I guess that prompted me to have this particular question is really the relationship between the so-called codes, accounts, and the digital self, and the so-called real person, or at least in a biological and social sense, which helped me to sort of think about maybe the framework of operationalism might offer some insight. So it is quite clear that digitally created identity are task-oriented and are predetermined by outcomes and expectation. So I take the inspiration from the theory of media operationalism to perceive the process and consequences of automated decision-making media that I have experienced so far. As media technology have becoming increasingly instruction-focused, they strive for precision and accuracy of the automated decision-making instead of focusing on diverse meaning-making of symbolic representation. Operational media, as Crandall defines, are inherently a form of disciplinary media that seek to map and expand the power boundary of the regime. Users of operational media are hence subjects to Foucault's concept of subjection. So the power of the regime and media user are made to follow instruction and simulation. Their agentic self and emotion are not removed, but it's more like they are not being recognized by the very system that we rely on to conduct our everyday life. So in my abstract, I make the point that one might not be replaced by a robot as the popular discourse runs in China and across the world. But I do feel that we are probably more likely to be confined by the very own operational subject that are continuously being produced by the digital system. The relationship between a person and their digital identity or subjects, to be more precise, are dialectically defining each other through the process of connection and disconnection, convergent and divergent. An operational subject would need to be physically practiced, action, and social relation to be produced and consolidated, such as one actively using their mini program. However, how the operational subject actually functions, and at times the very existence of such an operational subject would actually not require the consent, nor sometimes awareness of the person. It is a subject that's for the regime rather than a personal expression of the self. So here I like to make one final point about my deliberate use of the plural as media use, plural of subjects and identities, because media users today are constantly being encouraged or even at times forced to accept multiple operational subjects of themselves. It is indeed not only in China but around the world that the amplification of life and the fact that of a app-dominated platform economy, life have exemplified my observation. So, of course, as again, the paradox here is that in China, the fragmentation and continuous division of the self and the production of endless operational subjects are accelerating while the Chinese government has been promoting this idea of a unifying data network system in China. In the West, the amplification of life can be read as a result of liberal market economy or neoliberalism reason that companies are striving to compete against each other, and therefore they want to maximize their data harvesting. Hence, they force us to create an app for their own particular economic interests. China is different. The government has been openly promoting and even actively building a digital ecosystem that would allow seamless data sharing and synchronization across all networks, and in other words, the fragmentation of the self take place during the centralization of the data network platform. So how can we make sense of that? I have no answer to that, but I sort of leave here and invite all of you to pick on your wisdom, and hopefully we can continue on that discussion.
Yes, thank you. And I think everyone who has been to China recently has their own stories of humans serving the system instead of the system serving humans, right? Fabulous. We are then rounding up with Winston. You're presenting a lot? All right.
Hi, I'm Winston. This is a paper by me and Wang over there, the two tech support boys, and my supervisor is Hai Ching. Yeah, I'm a PhD student at RMIT, and I'm about halfway through. So this is based on my first empirical chapter on the social credit system as part of Hai Ching's project as well. So I found quotes on the corporate social credit system, meaning applying to businesses, enterprises only, not natural persons. So this paper is on the corporate social credit system, and Schaefer here in a report for the US government on the geopolitics of the corporate social credit system, I would argue is the best resource for this. Comprises a nationwide data gathering effort intended to regulate corporate behavior simply. The scale is often, what we are quite impressed with in terms of China, but as with a lot of papers on the social credit system, an important thing to do is to debunk myths and automation. There is currently no known instance, so it's a kind of a funny panel for me to be in, but there is currently no known instance in which an automated operational data collection leads to, there is the collection of data is automated through computer system information systems, but in terms of the decision making, it doesn't scale. So what my paper might contribute in terms of this panel is sort of the data infrastructure, the foundation of what possibly in the future could be automated. I draw on here concepts from science and technology studies, STS, and more specifically here, Kitchen and Leroux, critical data studies. So institutional, physical, and digital means for storing and sharing. You can read that. The structure that I'm still grappling with. This is my first paper for this thesis, and it's been tough. But yeah, I'm looking at data objects, the socio-material composition of these objects themselves, then data classifications in terms of history and sort of negotiation in terms of different catalogs, and then data journeys, following more what Wilfred went through, the platform walkthrough, following a code. So here, these definitions are pretty self-explanatory. You can read that. The Unified Social Credit Code is an important development. It amalgamated prior business, organizational tax, blah, 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 ID numbers into the single code. And this occurred 2014 to 18 before really the corporate social credit system took off. So it's kind of the foundation. PCI, essentially public credit information, government information, market credit information, and the financial market is tech companies in the private sector. Financial credit system, financial credit information is an older term, probably connected most with the CRC, Credit Reference Center from the PBC, which was the first credit bureau, and really just the traditional financial credit as we know in the West. So a strong impetus for my PhD was to kind of debunk myths from particularly Western media about the social credit system, and kind of just really try to illustrate simply what the data infrastructures are. So here is a mapping of the objects and infrastructures. What we talked about in terms of PCI and the sort of Credit China is here. The enterprise social credit systems here. Xinyi Dai is kind of a services, is kind of using social credit system data to offer more like rental services, finance, like subsidies on loans, transport, bike sharing, blah, blah, blah. So this is kind of what we think about now as the social credit system run by the NDRC, also in collaboration with the PBC, but really controlled by them. And this is the sort of state agency, National Public Credit Information Center. I forgot to introduce like the symbols here. State agencies, the red squares, blue circles, the credit platforms, and private firms here, the green ovals. In the middle here is where I'm moving more into in terms of looking at public-private collaboration. So PCI, the state is really encouraging private companies to adopt PCI in their sort of collection and sort of even algorithmic automated sort of scoring. But CIS here, Credit Information Services, this is the newer sort of area. Chichacha is the sort of probably the most popular one, and significantly only a few months ago was given a license by the state to operate overseas. So previously, you might have heard about the people and all the other laws that the state introduced. So previously, they were not allowed to give this information overseas, and this is an interesting development, moving away from the hard security kind of line and maybe looking more towards economic development. CRA, so Sesame Credit is Juma Shinyu. Sesame Credit is what probably a lot of people think of in the terms of the social credit system. Importantly here, it's just a private system. They were given licenses to pilot this scheme, and then the state revoked that license for all 8 private tech companies, the big tech giants, straight away. And now this moves on to how they're sort of regulating the private sector through the PBC now. So this is the CRC, the old Financial Credit Bureau, and here is the 3 so far state-controlled public-private partnerships with the big tech companies. So and here, this one is with all 8 of the big tech companies. This was the first one, and this one is this one is in Beijing with I think Tencent, and then this is this one. Okay. Data classifications. This is just a list of what I've been working through. I'll skip that. This is the sort of the results from what I've been doing. So they published data catalogs on PCI for these 3 years. This graph shows the change per year in terms of the subcategories per category, PCI category. So these are the 13 as of 2024 that have been sort of solidified. You can see here in blue, not many subcategories at first. They were all subsumed into like big subcategories. Green in 2022, they really expanded, and as you can see, blacklists have by far the most. And this reinforces kind of what we found in terms of the social credit system, that it's not really about trust and improving trust and positive behaviors. It's more about regulating compliance for negative behaviors. And then in pink here is more, see this one's going backwards because these I suspect is because these 2 categories were not very well developed in even the central government's platforms, Credit China. So they've cut down on the number of subcategories here. And in pink here, legal and this is a completely new category. It's quite surprising to me, and could be in relation to we're still waiting for the social credit law, like 10 years later. That's coming out. And then here are some provisional PCI categories that were removed. So 14, 15, and 16. I'll just go over this quickly. 14 these are like more frivolous kind of information. Like you might have heard media stories about municipal governments you know, punishing people for these kind of ridiculous things. So yeah, you can see here in terms of this story that there's in 2022 and 24 they've really simply just removed these subcategories, telling local governments not to do this, not to collect this information, and not to sort of regulate. And you can see here in the scope of inclusion, they were already quite cautious in 2021, but it wasn't enough, so they just cut it. And then here is administrative punishments. This one is an important category, but they've just reclassified it to a provision in the catalogue itself. And then quickly with the data journeys, this is my sort of trying to zoom in now for this paper and doing a walkthrough of a particular social credit code. And this is the sort of journey through the platforms from a GitHub data set that I found online that the creator told me he scraped it from Chichacha, credit through the Credit China, the big sort of state platform, the enterprise platform, and then peripheral ones. Yeah, I'll just go through it. So this is the data set that I was able to use, just some descriptive statistics about it. All right, I'm skipping. Yeah, that's just about how I sort of collected the information. But this is the first sort of screenshot for this particular company, your credit code, pretty similar information, Credit China and the enterprise platform. This is administrative information you can find, also quite similar. But what's different here is you can see here the data flows are not as smooth. So this is the state courts sort of publicity platform. And you can see it's represented in Credit China, but it's not. And this enterprise platform is connected more with SAMR, the market regulation. So that's probably why. Chichacha is the private platform, and I think most people would tell you that this is the most reliable for professional lawyers, corporates. This is what they use. Some of my friends as well, they've been telling me to change my topic. But yeah, this is Chichacha. You can see already here, this is what the information that was in the previous slide, but already you can see there's so much more information, and they just collected from a lot of different sources. And here's the difference as well. They provide an amount. So to conclude, mammoth scale and substantial complexity in those three aspects of the data infrastructures that I'm looking at. Complexity in terms of the mapping, negotiation in terms of historical development of these classifications, the catalog, and friction, strict. And then, yeah. So yeah, just to connect it back to the panel, this is what I'm looking at as sort of the data infrastructures of social credit system into automation. Thank you.